Well, on tariffs, what we know right now is that there are steel tariffs. And based on our experience about 15 years ago when the United States also imposed steel tariffs, we think it will impact our steel imports because the steel will be more expensive, and so folks will be looking for other suppliers, or they'll be looking for alternative materials. As it happens for the Port of Houston Authority, steel is less than 10% of our total revenues. So it'll have an impact, but it won't be a real important impact on us. It won't be a real material impact, but it will hit our bottom line because that is a profit center for us, and that's one of our biggest commodities outside of containers. So steel will have an effect.
When I listen to the news, I'm hearing, particularly about farmers, that every, whether it's agricultural or whether it's animal, pigs or whatever, that steel is a big deal. That is like every 10 minutes, I think they said, every 10 minutes a farmer touches something steel.
I heard that this morning too.
Oh, is that right?
I heard that on NPR this morning, right? And I think that's true. I'm more concerned, and I think our businesses have to be more concerned about what's happened since the steel tariffs were announced, because then, China announced some retaliation,
right,
and then we've announced some other materials that might be in the future. Now, it hasn't happened yet, but might be subject to tariffs, and then China came back again. So that uncertainty, I think, is something that's of a concern with us.
And I keep watching my stock. I keep watching the stocks to see
Well, I think today, what I heard
how
last,
it's
they bounced
affecting
back.
the stock market.
Today
Let's
they
see
bounced back.
what is it doing today.
I heard they bounced back
should have
today.
closed today, and they went up yesterday. Yeah, everything's green today.
Okay, yeah, they bounced back a little bit
Everything's
today.
green today, Claudia.
Well, because I think first came the announcements over the last couple of days, and then I think people are taking them in, and there's a whole process before the things that have been announced the last few days take effect. So that's still open to what the future will bring. But in terms of, for example, the Port of Houston, one of our big exports, and that was one of my points that I emphasized, we're the number one exporting region in the United States. And one of our big exports that we're expecting to be a growth area in the next few years is plastic resin. And my understanding is plastic resin is one of the items that China is proposing to put a tariff on. So if our sale of plastic resin is impacted, then we're going to have.
We might feel it.
We might feel that, and just in general, I think there are other. If there's this trade uncertainty, I think part of it is, and we've heard this for many years from business, and I think every business person can understand it. Uncertainty in the regulatory environment, and in this case, in the tax environment, because that's what a tariff is a tax.
Right.
I think those kind of uncertainties make it difficult to plan for the future, to invest capital, and to hire people. So I think the concern would be those impacts. We don't have a settled idea of how that's going to occur, or if it will occur, but those are the things we're thinking about.
Well, tell us about the economic impact that the Port of Houston has on our region.
Well, the number that I like to use is we're about 16% of Texas's gross domestic product, and we're close to $750 billion in dollar figure economic impact. So
That's huge.
yes, and that not only includes, of course, the people who load and unload vessels and things like that. That includes the people who work in the factories along the ship channel, and that also includes the people who work in secondary industries. And the example I mentioned in my speech, we import steel pipes. Then here in Houston, somebody has to prepare that pipe for its subsequent use, whether that's putting threads on it because it's going to be in some kind of a machine or apparatus that's threaded, or it's a special coating. All those kind of things we will be doing, and so all those impacts together, count for the number. But my larger message, and again one that I like to deliver, is many of us live away from the Port of Houston, and we know as an abstract concept that this is the energy capital of the world, and that the medical center is a big important, and certainly those are all very big important pieces of our economy. But so many jobs and so much value is created by trade and manufacturing. I mean, the reason those industries settled, along the ship channel 100 years ago was because we already had a banking infrastructure and a transportation infrastructure that other cities in Texas didn't have. And why was that? Because even 150 years ago, we were trading things like rice and timber and cotton in particular.
Right.
I mean, there's a facility in the medical center with Anderson at the end of it.
That's right.
And there was also, for many years, a company here in town called Anderson Clayton. And that was
downtown, isn't there a cotton exchange building?
Absolutely, and that was because we were a center for that kind of a trade. And so it's an interesting little circumstance that the wealth that was developed through the trade of cotton and the growth of cotton and the export of cotton then laid the foundation for a lot of what our subsequent, fame has been through the medical center. And it's true for a lot of, Kirby Drive. Kirby was a timber owner. And what did he do with the timber? Well, he built things here in Houston, but he also exported it around the world. So it's always been a driver, so oil and gas is very important, but that means more than just the oil and gas we put in our cars and trucks.
Exactly.
It's the chemicals that,
petrochemical
right,
plants
produce,
and those kinds of things.
we see plastic-based chemicals all around us, and our life over the last 70, 80 years has been transformed because of those petrochemicals. And Houston was at the center. Again, I mentioned this in my piece, we started producing synthetic rubber here during World War II as part of the war effort. And that was really the birth of our petrochemical business. And today, many of those plants are petrochemical plants.
You were talking earlier about what's the biggest import, what's the biggest export. So tell our audience what's the most popular.
Well, the one I can specifically address, and that's the most amusing, is our containers. Our number one container imports are from Red Bull. And our number two container imports are sent over by Heineken. So that tells you a little bit, but that's only a bit of the story, and those are very important trading partners, but a lot of the other materials that we import in containers are building materials, and this year the dollar quantity of, dollar value of containerized import of building materials is eking out some of those other things, in large part because of Hurricane Harvey. But it's also things like, when we all want to have marble and granite on our countertops if we can afford it, much of that comes from Europe. And those go into containers.
Italy and Turkey.
Right, and then there's an industry, a company, I think it may have changed its name, called Porcelanosa, and that recently, that is one of our big importers, and they bring it, I believe, from Spain. So all those things go into containers. Now what goes out, I mentioned plastic is a concern. One of the things, and as an aside, one of the things that's great about Houston is we are a big exporter as well. So in other places, you bring in the containers, you take out the stuff, and then you have an empty container, and the question is, what do you do with it? And somebody has to bring it back to wherever there is. Here, we don't have that problem in Houston, and that's a big strength of Houston. We bring that empty container over to Exxon Mobil or Shell Deer Park, and then they put their product into it. And so not only do we like it as a port authority because we make a little bit more money, but the shipping lines like it because that means that they have cargo both coming in and out. They make more money, and it just makes the system work more efficiently and overall keeps the prices down. And that's one of our big goals, obviously, is to be a low price, high quality but low price provider.